NASA is spending almost $100 billion for this project, and they are going to change the space race with this one launch, another manned mission on the moon. But more than that, when the Orion capsule finally breaks orbit, its true payload is a geopolitical warning aimed directly at a rival superpower, rapidly closing the gap in lunar development. Another step of human would be another giant leap for humanity, and Artemis II is going to change the space race forever. On paper, NASA classifies this 10-day expedition as a standard engineering checkout, but there's more than what meets the eye. In reality, it is a geopolitical high-wire act, operating entirely without a safety net. Every piece of hardware on the Orion capsule, from the life support mechanisms to a heat shield that unexpectedly degraded during its previous uncrewed run, is carrying the weight of a national timeline. A flawless mission keeps America on track to establish a lunar base by the end of the decade. A critical failure, however, would potentially hand the resource-rich lunar South Pole directly to a competing superpower. And recently, the worst has happened. Following a wet dress rehearsal in late February, engineers detected a critical interruption in the helium flow to the rocket's upper stage, a system vital for pressurizing propellant tanks and purging engines. This anomaly forced NASA to roll the massive vehicle off the launch pad and back into the vehicle assembly building for invasive repairs. Consequently, the highly anticipated March liftoff has been scrapped, pushing the earliest possible launch window into April 2026. Every month spent troubleshooting hardware in Florida hands a direct advantage to the competition. While Artemis II sits in the hangar, China is accelerating its timeline. Just days before NASA's rollback, Beijing successfully executed a highly complex flight test of its own next-generation Long March 10 rocket and the Mengzhou crew capsule, proving crucial launch abort capabilities and rocket reusability. China is operating with relentless precision toward a singular, stated goal: landing taikonauts on the lunar surface before 2030. If the Artemis program continues to bleed time on the launch pad, the United States risks arriving at the lunar South Pole, only to find a fully operational rival already claiming its resources. Well, things are shaping up very nicely, and it would be interesting to see which one of these powerhouse nations would be the first one to reach the surface of the moon. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel to never miss out on such important details. Now, coming back to the timeline, we need to understand and expect that more delays are almost inevitable. A shifting launch window, whether triggered by a helium leak, erratic weather, or exhaustive system reviews, is the baseline reality of engineering human-rated rockets. When the stakes are so big, NASA and the teams involved want to make sure that they don't miss out, and hence, the delays are inevitable. It is important to be the first ones on the moon, yes, but it is also important to make sure that the project is a success. We're looking to change the space race, after all. A lot of us assume the United States has a comfortable lead in this race, but that's simply not the reality. We really need to brace ourselves for even more delays as the launch gets closer. Every space program today faces a brutal choice: rush the schedule and risk the lives of the crew, or move incredibly slowly to make sure everyone comes home safely. Artemis II is caught right in the middle of that tug of war. The engineers at NASA are looking at a heat shield that took unexpected damage on its last test flight. Combine that with life support systems that will be keeping humans alive for the very first time, and they are essentially forced to play it safe, even if it means watching their political advantage slip away, month by month. When you look past the spectacle of sending people around the moon, you realize this mission is the ultimate stress test. NASA is betting our entire future in deep space on these massive systems working perfectly together. They need the Space Launch System rocket to do the heavy lifting, and they need the Orion capsule to act as a safe sanctuary for the crew. Everything that comes next, like building a space station in lunar orbit or sending private landers down to the surface, completely depends on getting this specific human flight right. Once these 4 astronauts safely fly around the dark side of the moon and make it back home to Earth, the entire conversation changes. We stop talking about the idea of going back to the moon, and we start looking at the reality of actually staying there. Establishing a permanent human presence is where the real battle lines are drawn, and that is where the race for absolute lunar dominance truly begins. So, the goal is more than reaching there. And who knows, we may be able to see humanity flourishing on the moon in the near future. While the rest of the world is getting excited about the Artemis flight path, the audience that NASA is really paying attention to is watching from Beijing. China is pushing hard, and like always, China is also learning from the West. Their space agency is moving fast. They're aiming to put their own crews on the moon by 2030 to start building the International Lunar Research Station. Back in the Apollo days, planting a flag and leaving footprints was enough to claim a win. Today, both sides know that the real goal is building something permanent. Chinese engineers are already testing out surface habitats, solar power grids, and even figuring out how to 3D print bricks out of moon dust. With everything moving so quickly, every time Artemis II gets delayed, it tells the rest of the world exactly where we stand in this race. The ultimate winner here won't be whoever touches down first. It's going to be the nation that sets up camp at the lunar South Pole and refuses to leave. Let's take a closer look at what the team in Beijing is actually building while NASA works through these delays. China's roadmap is officially called the International Lunar Research Station, or ILRS. Unlike the US, which leans heavily on private billionaires and commercial companies, China is running a massive, state-directed operation, pulling in international partners to share the load and the costs. Their hardware progress is moving incredibly fast. They have already locked in the Mengzhou spacecraft to carry their crew and the Lanyu lander to take them down to the surface. Right now, their engineers are aggressively testing the new Long March 10 rocket, hitting major milestones for safety systems and reusability. In fact, just this past February, they successfully proved they could recover and reuse their rocket stages right out of the ocean. But their timeline is the real kicker here. China has a hard, public deadline to put taikonauts on the moon before 2030. While the Artemis team is stuck troubleshooting in the hangar, China is steadily ticking off its checklist. At this pace, they could be laying the foundation for their lunar base before American boots even touch the regolith. We really have to stop thinking about this like the Cold War space race. You see, we're in the 21st century now, and things move a little differently. This time around, it is a massive exercise in logistics. Think about the water ice, trapped down at the lunar South Pole. Finding it is great, but the team that figures out how to actually mine that ice, that changes the game entirely. They can melt it for drinking water, use it to shield astronauts from radiation, and even break it down to make actual rocket fuel. The first country to lock down those frozen reserves gets an unbelievable advantage. Real power in space doesn't look like a dramatic sci-fi movie battle. It looks like owning the refueling stations, controlling the supply chains, and deciding who gets to communicate back to Earth. It's a quiet competition to write the rules of lunar commerce, and right now, the safe return of the Artemis II crew is going to decide if the United States gets to hold the pen. And another thing that separates this from the Cold War space race is the fact that NASA isn't doing this alone anymore. They are leaning heavily on private companies to help build a permanent lunar economy. We've got Elon Musk's SpaceX building a massive version of Starship, specifically to land astronauts on the moon. And right behind them, Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin is working on its own competing landers. At the same time, a whole fleet of smaller commercial companies is already sending robotic scouts to the moon to map out those critical resources. If NASA can get this foundational Artemis flight right, private industry is going to take that blueprint and run with it. But teaming up with massive corporations brings some serious risks. Companies like SpaceX want to move incredibly fast, blowing things up and iterating until they get it right. NASA, on the other hand, moves incredibly slowly because their top priority is making sure every single astronaut comes home alive. Figuring out how to balance that aggressive commercial speed with the government's extreme caution is going to define our future in space. Moving fast is a great weapon in a space race, sure, but building something that actually lasts is the real winning strategy. Right now, every country aiming for the moon is staring down the exact same impossible choice. The space agency leaders and engineers have to decide: do we rush our rockets to the launch pad and risk a catastrophic accident? Or do we take our time to protect our crew, knowing we might lose the race? A deadly failure out in deep space could instantly shut down a nation's entire space program. But if you play it too safe, you practically hand the moon over to an opponent who is willing to take the gamble. The team behind Artemis II is caught right in the middle of that brutal tug-of-war. When these 4 astronauts finally strap in, they are carrying the weight of that exact dilemma. Whether this 10-day flight succeeds or fails, it is going to prove which strategy actually works when human lives are on the line. Building a permanent base on the moon guarantees absolute control over how we travel through space. The first country to set up camp, they get to write the actual rules. They will decide who gets to go where, and they will shape the path for humanity as we push deeper into the solar system. When we finally watch Artemis II lift off, we are watching a massive, high-stakes chess move. This launch is simply the opening play in a much longer game, in a race where everyone is trying to claim territory and push their technology to the absolute limit. Getting into the best position right now decides who controls our future. The moon has become the ultimate strategic high ground. For all the engineers, astronauts, and agency directors involved, the goal is crystal clear. We need to establish a permanent home among the stars, and we have to make sure we are the ones leading the way.